Well, I have a modern game to talk about. So that we'll see how that does. I've been playing this game with JD, Lazy Justice, they call him. And we're playing Baldur's Gate 3. Great. I'm going to say it on the outset. Great game. Highly recommended if you haven't played it. Really fun. Turn-based tactical RPG based on the rules of Dungeons and Dragons. So I'm gonna put that out there. Before I go into this, I think it's a great game, and I highly recommend it. So if you're looking for a review of it, there it is. But it's gotten me to think about Dungeons and Dragons intersecting with gaming culture, like with like being a video game. And I've come to the conclusion that it quite frankly doesn't work. I don't think D&D um, really works as a video game and vice versa. And I don't think that's a bad thing. Um, I just I get nervous because a game like this gets really popular. Like Baldur's Gate 3 is on fire. Like people are buying it like crazy. It's being talked about as like revolutionizing gaming. Maybe it has in some ways. But I get nervous because then I, I suspect people play it and they're like, oh, maybe I should play Dungeons and Dragons now because like it follows a lot of the same rules. Um, it would be cool to try Dungeons and Dragons. And from that point, it's a cautionary tale because I've seen people get into Dungeons and Dragons and they're looking for a video game experience. And it's not how Dungeons and Dragons works, unfortunately. Dungeons and Dragons, for those that aren't aware, is a game as old as time, I guess you could say. Um, but it's not really a game, it's more of just a tabletop experience. Because if you look at the rules of a game, right? Games have a goal, a purpose. And theoretically, not all games, but most of the time, from a gamer mentality, you're looking to achieve a goal and get and finish it and complete it. Like you do this, and then this happens, and then you beat the boss, credits roll, you win, good job. Okay, that's a game. With Dungeons and Dragons, it's more about the experience. And your characters never complete anything. In fact, I would argue that 99% of Dungeons and Dragons campaign end with a wipe where everybody dies. And then that's it. Like you will never see because there is no end credit scene. I know some people that have played with their characters so much that their character is the max level, which is 20, and they just go on adventures with the level 20 character. It's like why? Like what's the purpose? That's what they want to do. That's their experience. Um, so it got me thinking like how do you even port over Dungeons and Dragons to a video game? And I think they tried their best. I've seen it done many times with like Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. Um, they're a great game. I love it. They've done it for years with other things like the original Baldur's Gates and stuff, and then Pillars of Eternity, and then now here it's Baldur's Gate 3. But there's so many problems with translating Dungeons and Dragons over, and one of the big ones that I've noticed is the ability to save your game, which to anybody that's played an RPG, it's kind of the rule that you save often and as much as you can. And ironically, I think Dragon Quest does it best by not giving you quick save. You have to save at a temple, at a church, however you want to call it. And then you can go about your adventure. But even that is flawed from a D&D perspective. Because in D&D there is no game over. Well, I guess in D&D there is a game over. It is if the game is literally over and you have to start over. So when you're playing a game, there is no real game over. Like you were saying before about you said it about something else, and it resonated with me because it was like you're right. There isn't a game over. It's go back to your save file. Um, so I was playing Baldur's Gate 3, and I'll give you an example. In Baldur's Gate 3 and in D&D, the way that you win conversations is through charisma. It's a stat. So you take charisma, and if your charisma is high enough when you roll, it's possible that you can convince a character to do something or to think a certain way. You're at a bridge and they say to get across this bridge, it will cost you 300 gold. You bring your character with high charisma and you say, "Hey, I'm pretty cool. Maybe you need somebody on the other side of that bridge like me, and it'll make you more money in the long run to have me across." If your charisma's high enough and you roll well, he'll say, "You're right. I think I could use somebody like you over there. You guys can go." Well, here's the problem with that. So if you do that and then you fail the roll, you could then fight him or you could pay him. That's kind of how D&D works.
And KOTOR a little bit.
KOTOR, exactly. You have to you problem solve. So if you fail one way, well, that means the consequence is this. Okay. Here's the problem. We're playing Baldur's Gate 3, right? What do we do right before we get to a conversation?
Save.
We quick save.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I walk up to him, the guy at the bridge, and I say, "Oh, you need me on the other side of that bridge." And then I roll and I fail the roll. My charisma check, even though I'm high in charisma, I rolled poorly, so I failed the roll. And he goes, "Nah, I don't like it." Okay, now in D&D, that's when you have to problem solve. In video games, quick load. And say, "Let's try it again." So by that token, yes, you've upgraded your charisma as high as you can, but the charisma stat doesn't matter because you're just going to reload if it fails. So your charisma could be as low as possible and you're just looking to roll a 20. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day. So there's a lot of things about D&D that actually don't transfer to a video game very well. And I was just playing it, just thinking about that. And I think I actually probably irritated JD with saying it so often. I was like playing it, and then something like that would happen. And he's like, "Oh, I think we were like at an area," and he's like, "Okay, let's quick save because I know a sneak attack is happening." And I was like, by you thinking that and choosing to quick save, that is why D&D is not a video game. And he was like, "Well, I'm not playing D&D." And I'm like, "You're right. Nor should you." It's like some of those people should not play Dungeons and Dragons.
It's like you're missing the point of like why we're playing this game in the first place.
Right.
Yeah.
100%. And it got me to thinking just like how many people probably are now thinking about playing D&D and it is not for them. Yeah. So that's just something I wanted to think about. I was like, I had all that in my head and I'm like, I have nowhere to put that out. Like I have no output for that.
Yeah.
And then you're like, "You should come on my show." I'm like, "Okay, I got something." And again, I do want to preface, Baldur's Gate 3 is fantastic. Mm-hmm. Okay, have fun with it, enjoy it, but also understand that it's broken. Like it's broken from a D&D perspective. It's technically flawed in that way.
I want to make the disclaimer. I've never played Dungeons and Dragons. You've invited me to play virtually. I just haven't taken you up on it. And I am not a PC gamer, so I haven't downloaded Baldur's Gate. But with all the hype around it, I'd be interested in maybe trying. There's no reason I can't set up the PC in the other room and just boot up my Xbox 360.
It's coming to console. It's coming to console soon.
Do you think it would be as enjoyable on a console?
It'll be fine. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
It's turn-based, so it's not like clicking or anything that you have to do too fast.
Do you think it's fixable by D&D standards? Like, do you think that adding the Dragon Quest like temple save mechanic would at least redeem some of that authenticity?
Yes, highly.
So it's not that it's not possible. It's just that the measurement wasn't taken.
Mm-hmm.
Is that not a perfect fix?
It's not a perfect fix, but it is a fix. Mm-hmm. Because what you're doing needs to have weight. And in RPGs of today, they severely lack weight in their actions because you can quick save. Yeah, this boss fight looks pretty hard, but I can just quick save the load right before it, and I'll just keep doing it until it works.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but imagine, no, we are an hour deep into this dungeon, and then you have to do that charisma check. Okay, now the charisma stat matters
Mm-hmm.
because I can't quick save. If I do this, I have to redo everything. So now my actions actually matter, and I care that that charisma stat is high. And I'm even wondering if I should even ask the guy anyway, because if it doesn't work, he'll get mad and he could try to fight me. Okay, so now the tension in the game is there that in Baldur's Gate 3 is completely gone.
So it sounds like from like a thematic level and maybe even conceptual with, your character creation and your builds,
Mhm.
Baldur's Gate 3 succeeds on being a D&D like game. But on a mechanical level, it fails. Whereas I've played
100%.
games that are mechanically very much roguelike, start your entire freaking game over, Sheeran Mystery Dungeon handing me my own ass, or any in the Sheeran The Wanderer series.
Mhm.
Hades as well, although I think Hades gives you specific boons when you die that
Yeah.
you can carry to the next playthrough. And the Sheeran games not so much. So they're different playing fields for me. But as far as being D&D games, doesn't sound like it because it's still like the same game essentially. Even though things are randomized a little bit, it's not based on like your character's like, social abilities or skill levels.
Yeah.
Does that sound accurate?
Yeah, yeah, in general, yeah. I mean, those games you brought up, um, yeah, they definitely wouldn't be D&D games, but they do capture like what is right about games and what makes them right. It's hard to say because they're not. You didn't necessarily name one that was D&D ish, but
That's the point, is that they're not D&D
right,
ish,
right,
but in terms of the dying and then like you can't just like pick up from a save.
yeah,
The concept of a save is naturally not D&D.
correct.
Right.
Just the whole concept. So yeah, so like having even the Dragon Quest style or being able to save in certain places
Right.
is also not. It's closer because it adds tension. But if you don't have tension, you honestly don't even you really need to question if you have a game, right? Because without tension, I hesitate to say that because games are still popular and people like them, and Baldur's Gate 3 is very well liked. But I think it does lack tension, and I think that's a problem. Where in D&D, that's literally the whole thing. Back in the day, there were almost not even stories in D&D. It was, and I actually prefer that. It was literally just four adventurers who don't know each other have come to this town because there's a bulletin board that says, "We need you to kill the orcs in a cave." That's it. And that was the driving force behind it. It was okay, if I kill them, I get gold, I get potentially loot, and I get experience. There is no other thing behind it. So you go and you do X and you get Y and you have fun doing it and you try to find a solution to it. Maybe it's through talking, maybe it's through combat, probably through combat. Um, I see with Baldur's Gate them really pushing combat as like I don't want to say the background, but it is one of many solutions. And while I think a lot of people like that conceptually, um, D&D is a combat oriented experience or game, and it really needs to be rooted that way. It's okay to be able to solve certain things with charisma, but there should be a lot more instances where you just got to fight your way through. And I do get nervous too, seeing that. There's a whole new. Have you heard of like Critical Role? Have you heard of this? It's like the new popular Twitch thing where they play, and I think it might be YouTube or something, but it's like voice actors play D&D. And a lot of my friends get caught up in it, and I think they think that's what D&D is. And it can be for some people. But it's really not D&D because they're doing it for a show. So all their encounters are heavily dialogue focused. And they're like voice actors, they're professional voice actors. So they'll do like the orc. Be like, "Oh, how dare you cross my path?" And they'll do these cool voices and they'll put on accents and whatever. But D&D fundamentally is you going into a dungeon and killing the bad orc that's in it. Like, to get away from that, I see so many ripple effects that have caused problems of expectation and what D&D really is. And it makes me nervous
Yeah.
for the future.
Does it maybe bother is too much of a hyperbolic word to use here, but I mean, do you feel any type of way that Baldur's Gate 3 is marketed as a D&D style game?
Yes. Yes. It takes the rules of D&D to make a non-D&D experience, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And in D&D, classic D&D, I alluded to this earlier, but there aren't cringe stories where you have to save a character who his best friend has turned into a demon and killed 500 people and is now sitting on a throne made of bones and sucks the blood off of the bones. Like that. I don't need D&D didn't used to be about people being like grossed out by how grotesque things are, or like this lady turns into whatever she wants and like eats people, and like it wasn't about that. It wasn't supposed to shock you. It was as simple as I told you before: go into a cave and kill the mean orc. That's it. At a certain point, and maybe it's Critical Role, maybe it's Baldur's Gate or something, but people expect a really adult story out of these games, and it's not necessary. In fact, I think in a lot of ways it gets in the way. It becomes a problem.
It's more about just the journey than it is the superfluous things. And I think you're right
Yes.
that the culture with the Dungeons and Dragon movie having come out in the past year.
Oh,
And I when I was in Boston, I just was going through the comic book shop, and marketed in the Dungeons and Dragons section. I think there's Stranger Things. I guess there's some crossover there somehow.
yes. The monsters are Dungeons and Dragons characters,
I
which
see.
that worried me too.
Really?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's probably like a marketing thing, and unfortunately, the source material is like the sacrificial lamb, for lack of a better term. Like it's just being used as kind of like the oh yeah, hip, cool Dungeons and Dragons, old school gaming, you know, Critical Role.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's become a problem because, and hopefully they ain't listening, but I've played campaigns now, and we'll play for like 3 hours a night, and I didn't look at my character sheet. It was entirely dialogue. Like it was like for 3 hours, we walked around town and talked to people. And that is some people's perspective of what D&D is at this
Mm-hmm.
point. And I'm getting off the thing, and it's like all the guys are like, "Oh, good game. That was good. That was good."
Like what
And I'm
game?
just sitting. Yeah, I'm like, "What game? Like what did we do? Like we literally didn't do anything."
Right.
And I was like, "Is that what you think this is?" because it's weird that you picked a barbarian, figured out every weapon that they're supposed to use, min max their stats so that they can hit as hard as they can, pick the traits that you think would make best for combat, and you spent the whole time talking. Like, does anybody realize that 95% of the game is built on the rules of combat? You spending it talking has done you no favors. I don't. What is your history with it? Like, did you know about? Where did you learn about D&D, and have you ever been interested in it?
It's always been like a game of mystery to me because I always hear about people who, like my younger cousin has a D&D group that he goes to. Mm-hmm. He's like, oh, you should try it sometime. It's fun. And everyone's always like, you should try it. But it's like, there's no real way, it feels like, for me to get into it. I don't even know how or where to start with D&D. And I guess I have a fear too of like jumping in too late and maybe not even like, it sounds like I might even jump into an inauthentic session. So it's like, I don't.
Yeah. And that's part of my big problem. Is how do you get new people in if that's what they think this is? Because they'll hate it.
And I also understand through conversations with Terry that there is no true like video game representation of Dungeons and Dragons. Like, it's, even though video games are based on the rules of Dungeons and Dragons, they cannot be Dungeons and Dragons.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't fully understand that. Like, it's one of those things where I feel like I have to experience or see it to understand it. Like, I'm doing the best I can to follow your train of thought, but I also don't know. Like, right. If I just watch somebody's game online, like, is this a real game? I don't know.
And that's part of the problem with it, is it's really warped what people understand about D&D. Also, side note, what probably hurt D&D was COVID too. Because it used to be where you could walk into a card shop or comic shop or whatever, and there'd be a crew playing it, and you'd be like, oh, like, or I can jump in. They'll usually have a character sheet and like, here, make a character. You need help? Cool. Everyone was usually cool about it, and that's why it used to be like a social thing. All the games have moved almost exclusively on Zoom.
The orcs have compromised the video, so Spencer
Here we
is
go.
going. Okay, he's back. Okay, cool.
So yeah, they've all moved over to like Discord or Zoom or whatever. I still have you, but it's frozen.
Yeah. This time they got the bandwidth.
Okay.
Okay, cool.
I can't hear you though.
No? Still?
Okay, now I can hear you.
Let's go.
We're good. So yeah, it's all moved over, so it's digital. It's through webcam, or not even webcam. It's just like these voices that come out, and then trying to make that make sense. And it's so distorted at this point that I don't even think D&D really exists in a lot of ways. And it's unfortunate because I think about people like you, that it's like you would actually be really good at it, and I think you would probably enjoy it. Like, you just take a character who's got some stats, and you make decisions like you were that character. Like, if I'm a barbarian, and somebody's on a bridge asking me to pay 300 gold, what would I do? I'd probably hit him with my axe as hard as I can.
Mm-hmm.
And so you do it, and that's fucking cool. I think that's lost at this point. I think people would look at you and be like, why didn't you talk to him? He could have told you the secrets of the Bligrong Bee or whatever. And you would be like, oh, because I'm a barbarian. I'm an asshole. Like, that's why.
Mm-hmm.
And but I think that's lost, and it's unfortunate.
Because I don't have 300 gold for to stay at the end when we get over to the next town. So screw you, bridge dude. You know,
100%. Yeah. That's exactly how you should play it. And I just don't think people see it that way anymore. It's about dialogue.
So is there a way to experience authentic D&D somehow, whether like from a bystander's perspective or in like fully like an authentic, like engaging way? Like, you know what I mean? Like playing the game?
Yeah,
nowadays.
they're called like game stores now. Like they moved away from being. I think they still might have them in some
Like a
places,
board game cafe or something.
but they're like cafes. I guarantee you there will be games. I know COVID hurt that, but they should be back. I've seen some advertisements, and I'm sure New York has millions of them.
Hmm.
Here they're a little bit more sparse, but if you look for like a board game place, I bet you could go there and just sit in on it if you're
I'll fill in his blank. If you're not a pleb, that is something Spencer
the,
would say.
the yeah.
You heard that right?
Yeah. Yeah. Not a pleb. Characters for sure.
Okay.
But you could sit there and be more than happy to help you.
Okay. Cool. Well, I could jump on the Dungeon and Dragon bandwagon. That's the that's the catchphrase right there. You got any more on the segment? If so, maybe you want to turn the cam
I
off.
can't
Maybe
hear
that would.
anything.
Hold on, I'm here. I made a stupid rhyme catchphrase for Dungeons and Dragons. You might have missed it, but it's there. Spencer, thank you for the segment. I'm going to presume that due to technical difficulties, we'll call the Dungeons and Dragons bit there. And ladies and gentlemen at home, you can check out Spencer over on his channel, RPG Archive, here on the YouTube.